Are you struggling with guilt from your past? And do you truly believe that God has forgiven you for it? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Beat. And today I want to give you 4 things that I believe that God would say to somebody who is struggling with the guilt from their past. And so today our story comes from Luke chapter 22, where Peter fails Jesus in an area that he never imagined that he would. Peter is normally the most outspoken out of all 12 disciples, and yet here he has this opportunity to take a stand for Jesus, and he denies that he even knows Jesus. And the scripture goes on to say that at the very moment when Peter realizes this, that his eyes locked with Jesus' eyes, and he went away and wept bitterly. The first thing that I believe that God would say to a person who is struggling with the guilt from their past is that God specializes in using people who have failed. Okay, so let's think about some of the people in the Bible that experienced major failures, and yet God used them to do some amazing things in spite of their failures. Okay, so first you have Abraham, who was a liar, and yet God used him to be the father of the nation of people who would later on become God's chosen people. Then you have Moses, who was a murderer, and yet God used him to set 2 million Jews free from Egyptian slavery. And then you have Rahab, who was a prostitute, who yet later was in the lineage of people who gave birth to Jesus Christ. Then you have King David, who was an adulterer and a murderer, and yet he was considered the greatest king that Israel ever had. And don't mention his son Solomon, who had 700 wives. And yet God used him to erect the first Jewish temple. And then if you fast forward to the New Testament, you have Paul, who was guilty of killing Christians, and yet God used him to write more than half of the New Testament. And let's not forget about Peter, who denied that he ever even knew Jesus 3 times. And so my question is, if God can use adulterers and murderers and polygamists and prostitutes and liars and cowards like Peter, then what could you have possibly done that was so bad that you have disqualified yourself from receiving God's forgiveness and God's grace in your life? And so the second point of encouragement is that God already knows your failures before you do. Notice here that Jesus actually predicts that Peter is going to deny him 3 times. And in the same way for us, God knows every single mistake that we're going to make, and even some of the ones in the future that we don't even know we're going to make. And yet, in spite of knowing all of those things, he still chose to save us anyway. So no matter what you do, you can never catch God off guard, which is the reason why you can displease him, but never disappoint him. And so the third thing that God would encourage you to do if you're struggling with accepting his forgiveness and you're wrestling with the guilt of your past is to turn towards him. Notice that Jesus says, Peter, after you've repented, I want you to turn towards me. Now, I don't know about you, but I can speak for me. When I feel like I have just fallen flat on my face, my tendency is to turn away from God. But here we see that God is inviting Peter to turn towards him in prayer and in Bible study or journaling or fasting or worship, or maybe getting together with a small group of community of believers that want to love you and care for you and pray for you and fight for you. Which leads me to my 4th and final point, which is that God can use your failures as the fuel that ignites your purpose. Notice here in verse 32, Jesus says, Peter, I want you to strengthen your brethren. You see, what the enemy wants to do is he wants to influence you to fail, and then he wants you to be so ashamed of your failures that you don't share them with anybody else, and as a result, no one can benefit from your failures. Sometimes the place of our greatest failures can actually end up being the place of our greatest ministry. So I want to encourage you today to truly embrace God's free gift of forgiveness and to always remember that you did nothing to earn it, and so as a result, there's nothing that you can do to lose it. If this video has been an encouragement to you in any way, or you may know somebody that is really struggling to accept God's forgiveness, they're struggling with the guilt of their past, please pass this video along to them. Also, if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button above. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time on The Beat.